Let's just quickly, and this can be quick because we've talked about this ad nauseum. The other team to consider, of course, is Israel, and I don't have to waste a lot of time because we've talked about them a lot. We talked about them last Monday, and I've referenced them throughout all of this lecture as well. Team Israel, Team Hebrew, so I like to throw it out, of course, are not Sunni or Shia. They're Jewish, and they're very pro-Western. So almost an outsider, but not really, because they're right there in the region. And the thing, without going into the history, because you already know the history and the conflicts and the Arab-Israeli dispute and the two-state solution and all this other stuff I've talked about. But here's what I want you to think about now in this kind of closing arguments about battle for control of the Middle East. Question one is like, well, what's the future of the two-state solution? Given that there's so much increasing pressure on Israel right now from the world that's been brought about by the Palestinians going to the United Nations and requesting sovereignty, just saying the hell with it, we're giving up on the peace process with Israel, we're just going to try to get legit through the UN. Israel's getting increased pressure from the world, but also increased pressure from their local neighborhood, and they're getting increasingly isolated. They're getting this increasing pressure from the local hood because everything's up in the air because of this Arab Spring thing. They're increasingly worried, I'm talking about Israel, is increasingly worried about the future of the Arab Spring leadership. Remember, both Jordan and Egypt, two neighbors of Israel, have recognized them, which means they have peaceful relations. Israel is extremely worried if that's going to last. Who will be in charge of of Egypt? They don't know. We don't know. Nobody knows. Will the folks who eventually become in charge of Egypt, continue to recognize Israel? Will they honor the peace pacts that have been put in place, a couple decades ago? We don't know. We don't know. For Egypt's a big question mark, but Jordan is not necessarily a very stable place anymore either. So we're not sure. Israel's not sure. And because of this, they're getting increasingly worried. They're getting increasingly isolated on the global stage, but also increasingly isolated locally because they're increasingly unsure if anybody in the neighborhood is going to recognize them. And then throw in Turkey, by the way. Sorry, I forgot about that little tidbit. That they used to have good relations with Turkey a whopping year and a half ago. And now Turkey don't like them. Well, I shouldn't say don't like them, but they're on the outs. So it seems like the chips are being stacked against Israel right this second, and they are very, very worried about that. But it doesn't end there. You now know from the ad nauseum talk on Iran that Iran hates Israel's guts and openly talks about it all the time and talks about destroying their state. Or actually, I take that back. Iran has never said that they were going to destroy the state. They have just said that perhaps it'd be good if Israel got pushed into the Mediterranean Sea. Anyway, and that the Jewish Holocaust didn't occur and lots of other crazy stuff. Now, so Israel is increasingly isolated, increasingly worried about the future of politics in its immediate neighborhood, but they also have to increasingly worry about Iran, whose rhetoric has gotten much louder lately. And you know that Iran has gotten more powerful and that its influence has increased across the entire Shia crescent. And that Iran is funding Hezbollah to attack Israel and possibly funding Hamas to attack Israel. And Iran wants nuclear weapons. I know, I shouldn't say that. I'm a lecturer. I should say that people think Iran wants nuclear weapons. But I'm going to go ahead and follow the IAEA's lead on this one. Since they came out just last week with a report that said, yes, we think Iran's trying to get nuclear weapons. I'm going to default to the IAEA. I don't care if people still think it's my opinion or not. It increasingly looks like Iran is trying to get nuclear weapons, and that increasingly worries Israel. I actually, by the way, think that that's a little unfounded. I think the Arab states have much more to fear from a nuclear-armed Iran than Israel does. But I guess it wouldn't make me sleep that much better at night if I was living in Israel. But to me, there's greater animosity and friction between Iran and, say, Saudi Arabia than there is that Iran would say, hey, just for fun, we're going to go blow up Israel. I mean, I guess it's possible. Anything's possible when you have crazy leaders. But certainly Israel is very worried about that. Worried enough to have made public statements to that effect here very lately, like last week, that says, hey, we may go blow up Iranian facilities. Israel basically says there's no way on God's green earth we can allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon because we are convinced they will use it against us. On top of that, Israel is increasingly worried about terrorism. And again, I mentioned Hezbollah and Hamas, but you also have radical Osama bin Laden's out there who side up with Iran on their opinion that Israel should be destroyed. So terrorism worries them a lot. Basically, in summation, Israel right now, 2011, is increasingly worried about its own existence. I told you that the thing that Israel thinks most about are existential threats. That is, things that will eliminate them from existing. I already told you already in other lectures and other places that the number one thing that Israel thinks about with all foreign policy decisions is existence. It's existential. What do we got to do to make sure that Israel's still here tomorrow? And they've been through many wars and with their neighbors and lots of animosity and lots of friction. But there's always been a sense of, well, but it's still kind of going along and everything's going to be okay. People are not so sure right now. I would say that the fate of Israel, both short-term and long-term, is more in question now than it has been for a long time. And I'm not saying that to be a fearmonger, and I'm not saying that to be anti-anything. I try to understand the world, and if I was in Israel, I would have trouble sleeping. I think there's so much going on right now and just so much uncertainty. It's playing into people from so many different angles. My greatest fear right this second is, Iran hates you. That Iran's always hated Israel and hates everybody. And you've had friction with your Arab countries in the past, but now it's uncertain about the future. And you got this dogpile effect where now Turkey doesn't like you anymore either. And you used to have good relations with Turkey. And so increasingly, Israel, it seems to me, as an outsider, seems to be more isolated than usual. They're always kind of isolated because they're so different in the whole circumstance of their historical existence. But more so than ever right now, the existential thing is really weighing heavily on people's minds in Israel and for Israeli allies like the United States and the world. Does that make sense for Team Israel? Big shakedown going on there in terms of uncertainty. It's very troubling. That is Team Israel. And of course, they still play a major part of the action in the Middle East because they have Team West backing them up. And by the way, because they have nuclear weapons. Again, it's not really stated out loud. People kind of keep it hush-hush, but we know they have nuclear weapons as well. And so they are still a critical player. They are a small country, a small population, physically small state, small population, but with a major, major stake in this game. And they do affect the balance of what's happening, for better or for worse. That's your Team Hebrew.